General Hospital teasers suggest that Rick Lansing may overdose on sleeping pills in the near future. Could Ava Jerome's drug plot go too far? In the August 27th episode, Ava told Lucas Jones she was having difficulties sleeping, and that her doctor couldn't see her for a few weeks. Lucas consented to write Ava a sleeping pill prescription, but only for 30 days. Ava convinced Lucas it was wonderful, and we all know why. Ava was clearly lying to get some sleeping medication for Rick, who is being held prisoner for 30 days while the treasure bonds mature. However, there is the possibility of conflict now that we have proof that Rick will be drugged. Ava despises Rick with a burning passion, and may let her vindictive emotions take over at some moment. Could this sleeping pill strategy fail? Could Ava become stirred up and attempt to overdose Rick at any point? After all, Rick, like Ava, is a deadly wild card. It's impossible to foresee what Rick would do to Ava once he's free, so she has legitimate concerns that he'll wipe her off the map. Alexis Davis and Christina Corinthos Davis are somewhat protected because they are Molly Lansing Davis' family. Rick would not harm them in retribution, but he could definitely harm Ava. This could lead to Ava deciding she should murder Rick before he kills her. Ava may find herself wishing that strike to the head had killed Rick, and decide to take matters into her own hands again. Now that we know Ava intends to drug Rick, will she go overboard and cause an overdose? If this is the case, Alexis, Christina, or even a rescuer such as Elizabeth Baldwin may locate Rick in critical condition. Rick may be sent to GH right away depending on how things turn out, so we'll keep you updated on any worrisome developments. Before Rick ended up shackled to a gurney in Alexis' basement, he finally confronted Christina and told her everything he'd been holding inside for months. And he was not wrong. Hearst expressed Rick's rage and despair in a scathing diatribe that Christina deserved. Who didn't want to cheer Rick on as he chastised Christina for almost murdering him when she was actually attempting to kill Ava? It's a credit to Hearst's abilities that we can truly feel sorry for Rick, despite his pond muck actions. Rick also made some excellent points, as Hearst displayed his gentler side by defending his daughter and emphasizing that Molly's baby died as well as Christina's. In truth, the baby was always supposed to be Molly's. When Ava arrived, Hearst's chemistry with Maura West was as strong as ever. Rick returned to sleazy mode, gleefully telling Ava what he had done with all of her money. Rick, it was a bad move since Ava was ready with the paperweight. It wasn't a good week for General Hospital's Rick image. ABC as Ava, Alexis, and Christina deliberated what to do with an unconscious person. Hearst had the difficult task of lying splayed out in Alexis' living room without busting out laughing because the scenes that followed were hilarious. However, when Rick appeared in Alexis' basement moments later, shackled to a stretcher with a ball gag in his mouth, Hearst was aflame. Rick awoke with tangible panic in his eyes and fear in his voice. When Alexis paid him a visit the next morning, Hearst gave us Rick's gradual awareness that Alexis had helped him do this, and she took pleasure in it, reminding Rick that he had done something similar to Carly years before. So far this year, JH fans have freaked out twice, believing Rick would die. If that doesn't demonstrate Hearst's abilities and contributions to the show, we don't know what does. Rick was restless that night, pacing back and forth in his poorly lit apartment, the shadows of his previous blunders clinging to him like a second skin. Everything about him felt heavier than usual, including the air, silence, and the weight of his thoughts. He tried to tell himself that he had things under control, but deep down, he knew his life was steadily unraveling. The tension between him and Ava had been building for weeks, and their unspoken competition had reached a point where one incorrect move could bring everything crashing down. Rick believed he was in control, manipulating things to his advantage, but what he didn't realize was that Ava had already prepared a trap for him, one so subtle and precise that he wouldn't see it coming. Earlier that evening, Ava had met with an old acquaintance at the Metro Court, sipping her martini with her customary elegance, but a storm was brewing beneath her serene expression. She was tired of Rick's meddling and his continual interference with her plans. The two of them had forged an uneasy alliance, held together by secrets and desperation, but Ava was aware that Rick had been working against her from the start. He had been gaining influence by probing her dealings and whispering half-truths to persons who could ruin her if they discovered what she was concealing. She couldn't let it happen, especially now that she was on the verge of achieving everything she had fought for. So that night she took an irreversible decision. She would neutralize Rick. The strategy was easy in conception but dangerous to execute. Ava had gotten her hands on a potent sedative, which she had obtained through a quiet exchange with a crooked pharmaceutical salesperson, and her purpose wasn't necessarily to murder Rick, as she told herself. She wanted him crippled so she could use the aftermath to her advantage. But Ava had miscalculated Rick's fragility, the extent to which his drinking had recently increased, and how the combination of booze and sleeping medications would push him to the verge of disaster. That night, she brought him over under the idea of reconciliation, claiming she wanted to make things right between them. Rick, fatigued and distrustful, couldn't resist the facts Ava placed in front of him. He arrived shortly after 9 o'clock, his shirt somewhat rumpled and tiredness obvious on his face. Ava greeted him warmly, almost too enthusiastically, but Rick was too engrossed to detect the deliberate softness in her tone. They sat down together, the dim light from the fireplace sending flickering shadows across the room, and Ava poured them both a drink. The talk began rough with harsh jabs and disguised threats, but Ava's patience was unwavering. She carefully steered the discussion, giving Rick the impression that he was in control when, in fact, she was leading him exactly where she wanted him to go. When his guard relaxed slightly, she excused herself to the kitchen and retrieved the little vial she had hidden in a drawer. Her hands were steady, she had mentally practiced this moment, and with a quick flip of her wrist, she emptied a few drops into Rick's glass before returning to the living room with the same charming smile she had worn before he arrived. Rick took a long gulp, grimacing slightly from the bitterness but said nothing. The drink swiftly clouded his senses, and his sentences began to slur. He attempted to concentrate on the talk and maintain his composure, but a dizzy haze settled over him, drawing him deeper and deeper into bewilderment. Ava sat across from him, her countenance impassive, watching the sedative take effect. She felt a surge of joy at first. She had done it, she had outmaneuvered him. But the ecstasy wore off almost immediately when Rick sank on the couch, his breathing shallow and his skin pale. Panic flashed over her eyes, but she forced herself to remain cool. This was not part of the plan. She hadn't intended for this to happen, at least that's what she kept telling herself. But Rick wasn't waking up, and the rising terror in her chest threatened to drown her. She knelt alongside him, relieved to discover his pulse still present, if faint and irregular. The conclusion struck her hard. The sedative combined with the booze had pushed Rick into dangerous area, and if she didn't act quickly, he might not make it through the night. Ava considered contacting 911 for a brief period, but it would have required her to answer questions she was not prepared to answer. Instead, she paced back and forth, her mind racing with possibilities for how things could spin out of hand. If Rick ended up in the hospital, the toxicology report would reveal everything, and her name would be permanently associated with his overdose. However, if she did nothing and Rick died here, the situation would be considerably worse. Her hold on power, her carefully crafted alliances, all of it would crumble in an instant. Ava's phone buzzed just as she thought she had run out of options. It was Julian. She hesitated to respond, but desperation won out. She swiftly described what had occurred, her voice low and frantic. Julian cursed beneath his breath, instructing her to keep Rick steady and not notify anybody else. Within 20 minutes, he arrived at her penthouse, shocked to see Rick comatose on the couch. "You said you just wanted to scare him, Ava," Julian said, kneeling alongside Rick to check his vital signs. "This looks bad." Ava swallowed hard, her confidence gone. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said quietly, but even to her own ears, the justification sounded hollow. Julian, who was always quick on his feet, took out his phone and called a discreet doctor, someone they both worked with before and could trust to stay quiet. By the time the doctor came, Rick's health had deteriorated. His respiration was ragged, his pulse uneven, and his complexion had turned a scary grayish color. The doctor quickly started working, injecting Rick with medication to steady his heart and counteract the sedative's effects. The room was silent except for Ava's weak breathing and the doctor's hurried instructions. After over 40 torturous minutes, Rick finally stirred, whimpering slightly as his eyelashes fluttered open. Relief poured over Ava like a tidal wave, but it was swiftly followed by another sinking feeling. Rick would know. Once he pieced things together, he'd realize what she'd done, and the consequences would be disastrous. When Rick got the power to sit up, his gaze was fixed on Ava, filled with perplexity, betrayal, and wrath all at once. "What have you done to me?" he rasped, his voice raspy and thin. Ava hesitated, looking to Julian for support, but Julian just shook his head, telling her to proceed cautiously. "You drank too much, Rick," she whispered softly, attempting to keep her voice steady. "You passed out, that's all." Rick wasn't convinced. Even in his frail state, he could read her too well, detecting the tremble in her tone and the way her eyes avoided to meet his directly. Deep down he knew the truth, and the truth blazed like fire. Everything about their relationship altered after that. Rick became cautious, cold, and calculating, quietly swearing to hold Ava accountable for her actions. Meanwhile, Ava battled to maintain her cool, knowing that one incorrect move could expose her, sever her ties, and leave her exposed in a society where vulnerability was fatal. In the days that followed, reports of Rick's unexpected collapse circulated across Port Charles, and people began to raise questions that Ava was unprepared to address. Carly, never one to pass up an opportunity to dig, began probing Ava for specifics, knowing there was more to the story than Ava was revealing. Even Sunny, who had a tangled history with Ava and Rick, began to keep a closer check on her, believing she had passed a dangerous line. What Ava didn't comprehend was that Rick wasn't going to face her directly. Not yet. He wanted to gather evidence, to build a case so strong that if he struck, there would be no turning back for her. But Rick had no idea that Ava had already started covering her tracks, deleting any evidence of the drug she used, and persuading important players to support her version of events. It had become a quiet struggle between them, as they fought in whispers and shadows, waiting for the other to make the first deadly error. Every time Rick saw her after that night, a cold rage burned beneath his placid veneer. And every time Ava looked at him, she felt the weight of what she'd almost done, not from remorse, but from the horrifying thought that Rick had survived and was now a menace she couldn't manage. Their fragile balance had ruptured, and Port Charles had no idea how close they had come to disaster. But deep down, Ava and Rick knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The overdose had altered everything, forcing them into a hazardous game in which every move counted and a single mistake could be fatal. The question that hung over each of them now was not whether Ava meant to kill Rick, but how far each of them was willing to go next. As the tension rose, one thing became clear. Someone was going to be wounded, and this time there would be no turning back. Rick Lansing, played by Rick Hurst, has long been one of General Hospital's most captivating characters, with his deep personality, complex motivations, and unpredictable decisions. Rick's arrival in Port Charles changed the dynamic of almost every significant narrative. He was never a clear villain, nor could he be termed a clean hero. Instead, Rick existed in a murky zone, where his intelligence, charm, and drive were frequently overwhelmed by darker urges and deep-seated fears. This intricacy is what made Rick Hurst's depiction of Rick Lansing so unforgettable, as he created a character whose actions continuously left audiences wondering where his true allegiance rested and what his ultimate ambitions were. Rick Lansing appeared on the scene as the half-brother of Sonny Corinthos, one of Port Charles's most influential and powerful individuals. The animosity between the brothers was palpable from the outset, and it only grew when truths about their common past emerged. Rick grew up feeling like an unwanted child, overshadowed by Sonny, and much of his early hatred originated from feelings of rejection and resentment. While Sonny established a life of power and influence, Rick felt cheated out of the same possibilities in love. This set him on a lifelong loop of competing with his brother, while yet yearning for his acceptance. Rick Hurst masterfully represented Rick's inner duality, the internal conflict between his ambition and his need for family, which kept people interested in his journey, even when his acts went against moral principles. One of Rick's first and most stunning storylines concerned his fixation with Elizabeth Weber. His obsession with her drove him down a dark and hazardous path, revealing how far he was willing to go to get what he desired. Rick performed one of his most infamous acts when he kidnapped Carly Corinthos and held her captive in a panic room inside his house, all as part of his twisted ploy to win Elizabeth's heart. This plot is one of the most memorable in Rick Lansing's career, not just because of the horrific circumstances, but also because Rick Hurst managed to make Rick both menacing and terribly sympathetic. On the one hand, his behaviors were clearly deceptive and harmful, But viewers could also see the deep loneliness and inner pain that led him to such extremes. Elizabeth soon realized Rick's lies and manipulations, and their relationship deteriorated. Still, Rick's bond to Elizabeth lasted throughout his time in Port Charles. Their paths crossed repeatedly, reigniting unresolved passions and severe conflicts. Rick's encounters with Elizabeth also revealed another important facet of his personality: his fragility. Beneath his strategies and calculating judgments, there was always a man craving for love, affirmation, and approval. Rick Hurst's nuanced acting made Rick's fragility apparent, which is why, despite his numerous wrongdoings, viewers could never entirely despise him. Aside from his sexual relationships, Rick's rivalry with Sonny remained one of the defining threads of his tale. The two brothers were frequently at conflict, arguing about power, family allegiance, and personal grudges. Rick's dislike of Sonny drove him to side with his opponents, whether it was collaborating with mob rivals or using secrets against him. Rick would occasionally try to reconcile, seeking Sonny's favor or forging some semblance of a brotherly closeness. This push-and-pull interaction between them resulted in years of tension and riveting drama, leaving viewers guessing about Rick's true loyalties. Rick Hurst brilliantly depicted Rick's internal tension, demonstrating moments when his fury flared and others when his desire for familial connection softened his edges. Rick's tenure as Port Charles's district attorney marked another watershed moment in his career. His legal knowledge and strategic mind made him a strong presence both inside and outside the courtroom. As DA, Rick frequently had to strike a balance between enforcing the law and utilizing his position for personal advantage. He was committed to justice at times, yet he also bent the laws to his advantage. This duality lent depth to his character. Rick wasn't merely a shadowy schemer. He was also a guy with power, influence, and the intelligence to wield them all efficiently. Rick Hurst's imposing presence in these courtroom scenes imbued Rick with confidence and charisma, earning him both respect and dread. Despite his desire, Rick's personal life remained disorganized and chaotic. His relationships were full of treachery, distrust, and heartbreak. Aside from Elizabeth, Rick had problematic relationships with Alexis Davis, a powerful and independent woman who challenged him in unexpected ways. Their relationship was passionate yet volatile, defined by clashing of ideals and priorities. He also had a daughter with Alexis, Molly Lansing Davis, which revealed a different side of Rick, the protective father who wanted to provide his daughter with the stability and love he lacked as a child. Watching Rick manage parenting revealed flashes of his softer, more nurturing side, demonstrating that underlying his deceptive tendencies was a man capable of profound love and sacrifice. Of course, Rick's darker instincts were never hidden for long. Over the years, he became involved in a variety of plots, alliances, and betrayals. Whether it was collaborating with mobsters, manipulating legal issues, or utilizing family connections to advance his interests, Rick's willingness to cross moral lines remained a defining feature of his personality. However, Rick Hurst's characterization ensured that Rick never felt one-dimensional. Even at his most brutal, Rick's purpose was always rooted in anguish, uncertainty, or desperation. Rick's blend of villainy and vulnerability made him one of the most interesting figures in Port Charles history. In addition to his personal difficulties and feuds, Rick's storylines frequently crossed with some of the most significant events on General Hospital. Rick was a constant presence in the show's core conflicts, from mob fights to courtroom confrontations to devastating betrayals. His brilliance made him a useful player, and his unpredictable nature kept fans interested. He could be an ally 1 minute, and then orchestrate a betrayal that shifts the power balance in Port Charles. This constant unpredictability raised the stakes in almost every storyline he touched. Rick Hurst's Emmy-winning performance gave Rick Lansing enormous depth, ensuring that even when the character was absent for extended periods of time, his influence remained. When Rick departed Port Charles, his absence was noticed, and when he returned, he revived old rivalries and relationships, adding new drama to the program. Rick's presence was constantly felt, whether he was plotting to gain power, defending a loved one, or attempting to redeem himself. Perhaps what makes Rick's character so memorable is that he represents the paradoxes and weaknesses that make humans human. He was ambitious yet insecure, loving yet manipulative, principled yet willing to give up those ideals when it suited him. He could be brutal one moment and tender the next. Even if they disagreed with Rick's decisions, viewers could understand his emotions and reasons thanks to Rick Hurst's multi-layered portrayal. Rick Lansing's versatility made him one of the few soap opera characters who could change while keeping faithful to his essential identity. Rick's interactions with others around him gradually shifted over time. His battle with Sonny progressed from open antagonism to periods of uncomfortable collaboration. His relationship with Elizabeth passed through stages of love, betrayal, and bittersweet closure. His relationship with Molly kept him grounded, providing him a sense of purpose beyond his vendettas and ambitions. These shifting tensions enabled Rick Hurst to demonstrate a wide spectrum of emotions, from violent conflicts to quiet, heartbreaking moments that struck a chord with viewers. Rick Lansing is still one of the most popular characters among longtime General Hospital viewers. Fans question his decisions, root for his salvation, and speculate on his possible return to Port Charles. If Rick returns, there are unlimited potential for fresh conflicts and alliances, especially because many of the show's current plots are linked to his past. Rick has unfinished business in Port Charles, whether as a redeemed hero, a crafty enemy, or something in between, and Rick Hurst's return would definitely fuel the drama that fans seek. Rick Hurst's portrayal of Rick Lansing has left an unforgettable impression on General Hospital. Over time, he transformed what could have been a one-note villain into a complex, deeply human persona. Rick's weaknesses made him sympathetic, his brilliance captivating, and his unpredictable actions memorable. Rick's story was a masterclass in soap opera storytelling, with courtroom drama, family betrayals, and unexpected sweetness. While his journey has been fraught with setbacks and turbulence, his lasting impact on the people of Port Charles and the audience is evident.